Happening today, a traffic safety expert will be at a conference at the Vista Civic Center to talk about what we can do better when it comes to drinking and driving.
The aim of the conference is to reduce the number of alcohol-related crashes in the county. Several surveys show drunk drivers usually have their last drink at a bar or a restaurant before they hit the road. Traffic expert James Fell with the Pacific Institute for Research and Evaluation says bartenders and servers need to be more attentive and stop serving people who are already intoxicated.
The local police have to follow it up and do some observations in the bar to make sure that they're following what they've been trained to do, and that's not overserve alcohol.
Fell says if servers pay better attention to how much customers are drinking, it could reduce the number of DUI crashes by as much as 40%.
We want to give you some perspective as to how often DUI crashes happen here in San Diego County. And last year alone, 1,700 alcohol-related crashes, 70 people killed, more than 2,200 people injured. Also last year, 10,000 people were prosecuted for driving under the influence, and half of those drivers had a blood alcohol level of at least 0.15. That should be 0.15. The legal limit is 0.08. 4,000 of those drivers said they'd been drinking at a bar or restaurant before getting behind the wheel. Bill?
Well, the campaign to cut down on drunk driving may have to start in local bars and restaurants. That's, somewhat of a change for those, it really is.
It certainly is. Some establishments are serving too much alcohol to customers, and by doing that, they could be breaking the law. KUSI's Sasha Fu says it's another way to tackle the problem of drunk driving.
Sandra and Alan, let's talk here about a little different emphasis, shifting the emphasis in preventing drunk driving. In California and many, many other states, it is against the law to serve more alcohol to someone who is obviously intoxicated. But in so many places, that law is not being strictly enforced, and one national expert says it's time to change that. Investigators say this deadly crash in Loma Santa Fe was likely caused by a driver who was high on drugs and alcohol. The passenger in the SUV was killed. A national expert on alcohol abuse says preventing more crashes like this one requires a stronger strategy than just saying don't drink and drive. He says bars and restaurants also have to stop over-serving customers.
90% of the bars in most communities don't want to see intoxicated individuals. They cause too much trouble. But 10% of the bars, they'll tend to overserve.
Many of the drivers arrested for DUI in San Diego County had their last drink in a bar or restaurant. In a survey of those drivers, the number was more than 41%. Research scientist James Fell says any establishment that serves liquor should require specialized training for bartenders and servers. That would include learning about state and local laws and what to do when someone is clearly too drunk to drive.
Serve food, give them free soda, and so on. There are countermeasures to somebody who's getting intoxicated. So that's what you emphasize in the training.
At Players Sports Bar in Claremont, owner Ted Semprini says all his servers have to go through that training.
If your staff is educated, I think that they can have a better read on people.
But researcher James Fell says there has to be a second component too: enforcement.
You also alert them to the fact that they can be sued if you overserve somebody and they leave and they injure somebody. And nobody wants that to happen.
Fell cites a study contrasting two sets of bars. In one group, there was training and later a follow-up to look at over-serving practices. The other group had no intervention. The results?
In the beginning, they didn't deny service to any of them, but after the training and the enforcement, they denied service to 30% of those people. So we did see an impact of it.
To make sure bars and restaurants don't overserve, Fell says cities need to conduct regular checks with undercover investigators.
The actual visits are covert. The officer would go in, not in uniform, and would sit for a couple of hours and observe the serving practices.
Bar owner Ted Semprini thinks that may be taking the enforcement tack too far.
To have somebody come in and sit into my place that I know that we do our due diligence, I just think it's a waste of time personally.
But Wendy Hanna thinks those businesses have an obligation not only to their customers, but to other people on the road.
Usually, I guess sometimes I think the drunker they are, the better the tip they get, but that doesn't do much for the rest of us out here.
She's even taken matters in her own hands by making a special trip to a bar that served too many drinks to a friend.
Yeah, I went back and asked them if they ever served this person again when they showed up like this, that I was going to call the police because the person barely made it home.
Well, some Some people might call that particular woman a good friend. But as we search now for community solutions to DUI crashes and other alcohol-related violence, we can probably collectively urge our law enforcement agencies and our public officials to really get tough on these laws, these service laws that are on the books, and help bars and restaurants and pubs to do their business responsibly. It is a start.
Yeah, and responsibility is the key. I mean, they really are responsible if they continue to serve someone who's obviously drunk.
Well, there's also the threat of a suit. He mentioned that, a civil suit. I mean, if somebody overserves someone and they get into a crash which causes injury or even death, you know, that establishment and that server may be on the hook.
Yeah. For some people, happy hour may not be so happy anymore.
That's
then,
right.
huh? All right. Thank you, Sasha.
Los cantineros serán capacitados para combatir el elevado número de conductores ebrios que se ponen detrás del volante. Información recopilada por más de 20 años sobre el manejo bajo la influencia de alcohol o drogas fue revisada y se concluyó que empleados de bares y restaurantes deben tener un entrenamiento enfocado a cantineros.
Cómo identificar a una persona que está intoxicada, que obviamente ha tomado ya demasiado alcohol, que la policía también haga visitas de encubierto.
10,000 personas fueron arrestadas por manejar bajo la influencia en el lapso de un año. Muchos de ellos dijeron haber tenido el último trago en un bar o restaurante.
En San Diego se liberó hoy otro reporte, alusivo a la nociva práctica de manejar bajo la influencia del alcohol o de las drogas. El reporte compiló información de 20 años sobre la práctica y se determinaron algunas pautas que los gobiernos de las ciudades deberían de seguir. Una de ellas es que bares y restaurantes impartan un entrenamiento muy específico a las personas que sirven alcohol.
De cómo identificar a una persona que está intoxicada, que obviamente ha tomado ya demasiado alcohol, que la policía también haga visitas de encubierto o que haga inspecciones y que se asegure que las reglas y las leyes se están cumpliendo.
But what happens with the alcohol that gets in the system, it clouds your judgment. And
De acuerdo con el jefe de la policía escondido, el alcohol nubla el sentido común. En San Diego, 10,000 personas fueron arrestadas por manejar bajo la influencia en el curso de un año. La mitad registró el doble del límite de alcohol permitido en el cuerpo. Una multa puede costar en promedio $10,000. Muchos de los arrestados dijeron haber tomado el último trago en un bar o en un restaurante.
Los cantineros serán capacitados para combatir el elevado número de conductores tras el volante con copas de más. Información recopilada por más de 20 años sobre el manejo bajo la influencia del alcohol o drogas fue revisada. Se concluyó que empleados de bares y restaurantes deben tener un entrenamiento enfocado precisamente en ello, en los cantineros.
Cómo identificar a una persona que está intoxicada, que obviamente ha tomado ya demasiado alcohol, que la policía también haga visitas de encubierto.
Es que 10,000 personas fueron arrestadas por manejar bajo la influencia en el lapso de un año. Muchos de ellos dijeron haber tenido el último trago en un bar o en un restaurante.
This deadly crash overnight in Solana Beach was the result of a DUI. 70 people were killed last year in San Diego County from drunk driving crashes. Tender's reporter Matt Mendez discovered what researchers are doing to curb the number of lives lost.
This mangled SUV landed on its roof in Solana Beach Friday morning, a result of a DUI crash that left the passenger dead. With the overwhelming number of DUIs in San Diego County, researcher Jim Fell spoke at a conference about ways to curb the problem. He says it starts with enforcing laws at local establishments.
We find that anywhere from 40 to 50% had their last drink at a restaurant or a bar.
According to the Place of Last Drink survey, last year more than 10,000 drunk drivers were prosecuted in San Diego County. At least 4,000 of those likely left a bar or restaurant. The Alcoholic Beverage Control, or ABC, says only 16 San Diego area bars and restaurants were ticketed for serving to intoxicated patrons this past year.
Staggering while you're walking, your slurred speech.
Chris Dugan with the California Restaurant Association says there are trainings in place for bartenders, hosts, and bouncers to cut people off when they've had too much.
It's very similar to a food handler card. It's a training certificate that you're going to get.
Only some cities like Chula Vista, San Marcos, and Carlsbad require bartenders to take the class. Many other establishments send their employees voluntarily, like Ian Linnikin, manager at McGregor's Grill and Ale House in Mission Valley.
There's no way that anybody should walk out the door here overly intoxicated.
Linnekin says he's even paid for customers' cab rides so they come back to keep them in business. Matt Mendes, 10 News.
Linnekin says undercover officers do come in periodically, but they have never been ticketed for serving alcohol to an intoxicated person. And here's some perspective on how we compare with the rest of the nation. In 2012, 802 people were killed here in California in alcohol-related crashes. Only Texas had more at just under 1,300. Alaska had the fewest in the country with 15.